You see, what Jesus' smashing success demonstrated was that God had, in his infinite wisdom, made the way by which human nature could become perfectly and securely united with himself. We learned about the nature of God's wrath, which the Apostle Paul said in Romans 1, is being revealed against all the godlessness and wickedness of humankind. And as we said, this isn't the thunderbolts and lightning we often typically associate with God's wrath. Rather, Paul describes God's wrath with the repeated use of the phrase, "He gave them over." He gave them over to their sinful desires. He gave them over to shameful lusts. He gave them over to a depraved mind. In essence, by giving us over, God is allowing us to experience in a preliminary way what it means to be separated from Him. And this tells us that the ultimate problem created for us by our sin is that sin has alienated us from God. Therefore, being reconciled to God is our ultimate need. So, God opened the way for His redemption plan by breaking through the barrier of alienation caused by our sin that kept us separated from Him through the incarnation of Jesus, who is the Son of God. But there was a second necessary step for God's redemption plan to succeed, through Jesus' perfect life. You see, for Jesus to be our Redeemer, it had to be possible for Him to perfectly unite God's nature with human nature. Recall that back in the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve enjoyed perfect fellowship with God. They were relationally united. They were uncorrupted in their nature, perfectly able and fit to bear God's image and glorify Him. But even in that idyllic setting, their relational unity with God was tenuous because it depended upon them to keep God's command. And this meant that no matter how perfectly they were set up to dwell with God, their relational union to God would always be conditional. And such a conditional unity meant that even unspoiled, perfect human nature was inherently, potentially corruptible. Let's look at the conditions again. Adam and Eve were created in innocence, without sin, illustrated by their being naked and without shame. They were placed in the garden, a protected, ordered paradise, and they were given everything they could possibly need: every tree and plant for food, unspoiled companionship with each other, and first-hand experiential fellowship with God, their Creator. But even starting from that standpoint of perfection, having natures that were not united to God's nature meant that their relational union with God could be broken. They could choose other than God. And they did. So even starting in a state of perfection with the perfect conditions, the first representative heads of humanity failed to secure our natures with God's nature. And so for Jesus to be our Redeemer, He would need to accomplish for us what Adam and Eve, as our first representatives, could not. Jesus would have to unite God's nature and human nature in a way that would become inherently, irreversibly, eternally incorruptible. And so, like Adam and Eve, Jesus, the Son of God, had to be tested. And He was, in a way that uniquely demonstrated how, as the Son of God, He could accomplish what no other person could. Where Adam and Eve were tested in a garden paradise, Jesus was tested in a desert wilderness. Where Adam and Eve were tempted to eat a piece of fruit in a garden full of food, Jesus was tempted to make His own bread after fasting for 40 days. Whereas Adam and Eve faced a single temptation during one encounter with Satan, Satan tempted Jesus multiple times over a period of 40 days. You see, what Jesus' smashing success demonstrated was that God had, in His infinite wisdom, made the way by which human nature could become perfectly and securely united with Himself. That was by forever uniting human nature with His own nature in the person of His Son. This is expressed so beautifully at Jesus' baptism. As Jesus is baptized and comes out of the water, the Father's voice from heaven proclaims, "This is my Son, whom I love. With Him I am well pleased." So, through the perfect life of Jesus, God forever established the foundation upon which He could securely unite human nature with His own nature. You just watched a very small part of our video series called Seeing the World as Jesus Sees It. If you want to learn more about how the Bible can change the way you see everything and transform your life, then click on the link in the description below. And thanks for watching.